My name is Liam, and for 10 years I poured my soul into building my wife's family business, a sprawling tech empire worth over $100 million. I wasn't just an employee, I was the architect. I started in a dusty back room with 2 interns and a secondhand laptop, and through sheer grit, I built their entire digital infrastructure from the ground up. I worked late nights while my wife Alina begged me to slow down. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, even my own father's funeral to be the right hand to her father, Emilio Delgado. He called me son. He told me I was the future of the company. He said he trusted me more than his own blood. Too bad he didn't put that in the company bylaws. 2 months ago, Emilio retired after a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis. He made a quiet exit, seeking private treatment abroad, and with no sons to inherit his empire, he handed the CEO reins to his oldest daughter, Celeste, my sister-in-law. Celeste was a woman with sharp heels, a sharper tongue, and a boyfriend named Travis who thought he was the second coming of Elon Musk because he'd once made a few $1,000s flipping a crypto coin. The writing was on the wall from the moment she took over. She stopped inviting me to executive meetings. She reassigned my team to projects that went nowhere. She started copying Travis, her new strategic advisor, on emails I used to be CC'd on. Still, I stayed quiet. I watched. I documented. And then, the moment I'd been preparing for finally arrived. During the quarterly board meeting, I was scheduled to present a $12 million expansion proposal, a deal I'd spent 6 months building. I was mid-slide when Celeste walked in, smirking like she'd already won the lottery. "We're going in a different direction," she said, cutting me off. Her voice was dripping with condescension. A younger, more innovative vision. She glanced at Travis, who was wearing a designer suit that looked 2 sizes too small and a smug look that made me want to punch him. She continued, enjoying her moment of power. "You've done enough, brother-in-law. We won't be needing your services anymore." A few of the sycophants on the board chuckled. My own wife, Alina, just stared at her lap, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked around the room, silent, calm. Then I smiled. "I understood," I said simply. "I'll clear out my office tonight." Celeste raised her eyebrow, surprised by my lack of reaction. "You don't seem upset." "Oh, I'm not," I replied, standing up and gathering my notes. "In fact, tomorrow's going to be fascinating." What Celeste didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had quietly spent the last 2 years preparing for this exact moment, and when the truth came out tomorrow, their empire was going to fall. Hard. That night, while Celeste, Travis, and their new board of yes-men were celebrating my exit with overpriced champagne, I was in my home office executing a plan I'd been building for years. 6 years ago, during a late-night negotiation in his study, Emilio had signed a private contract with me. It was right after I helped them save the company from a $28 million lawsuit that could have wiped them out. "For your loyalty," he'd said, a glass of bourbon in his hand. The contract, Addendum 12B, was simple but devastating. 15% of all intellectual property, licensing, and digital infrastructure developed under my name was to be jointly owned between me and the company. In the event of a leadership change, the agreement remained binding. Guess who built the company's proprietary software platform from scratch? Guess who filed the back-end server patents in his name and licensed them to the company? Guess who wrote the logistics algorithm that saved them tens of millions in annual costs? Me. And they thought they could just fire me without consequences. This wasn't a resignation. It was a trap. That night, from my private server, I remotely revoked every license key. The customer support dashboards went offline. The warehouse logistics software crippled. The entire e-commerce backbone of their $100 million company went dead.
I knew they'd panic. They'd blame a glitch, try rebooting servers, call in a dozen IT consultants. But they wouldn't find anything, because the real code lived with me, and it always had. At 8:03 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. It was Celeste, her voice high-pitched and furious. "What did you do? The entire back end is down. Orders are failing. Fulfillment is stalled." I cut her off calmly. I suggest you refer to Addendum 12B of the private agreement signed by your father. It's legally filed. I own part of the IP, and you breached our agreement the moment you terminated me without cause. Silence. Then a shaky whisper. You're bluffing! I laughed softly. Celeste, go check your email. And Travis should probably sit down before reading his, because the next wave is personal. Celeste thought she'd traded up. Her new strategic advisor, Travis, was a slick-talking Ivy League MBA with a toothy grin and a LinkedIn profile filled with buzzwords. But behind the facade, he was a con artist with a sealed criminal record in Nevada, a trail of failed startups, and 2 pending lawsuits for misappropriation of investor funds. I knew this because I'd hired a private investigator 6 months ago when I first noticed him hovering around the office. He wasn't a threat then, but he was a cockroach, and I always track cockroaches. At 9 a.m., just as Celeste was trying to spin the system shutdown as a scheduled software audit, an anonymous email hit every major shareholder's inbox. The subject line? Before you let Travis touch your money, you might want to see this. Attached was a 63-page PDF compiled by my investigator, screenshots of his shell company's bank transfers, documents showing how he'd once embezzled $180,000 from a previous employer and fled before charges could be filed. And the cherry on top, a recorded phone call where Travis casually told a friend, "Dude, once I'm in with the Delgado family, I'll drain that company dry." By noon, the board was in chaos. Share prices began to dip, vendors started pulling out of contracts, and Celeste? She tried to deny it all until Travis disappeared. Phone off, apartment cleared out. Gone. The man she'd fired me for had just ghosted her, leaving her holding a live grenade. She tried calling me 8 times. I didn't answer. Then she called her father. By 5 p.m., an emergency board meeting was called. Not by Celeste, but by Emilio Delgado himself. He'd flown back from his treatment center in Switzerland on a private jet. He walked into the conference room like a ghost resurrected. Everyone stood, even Celeste. His voice, always controlled and terrifyingly calm, cut through the silence like a guillotine. "Where is he?" referring to Travis. Celeste swallowed. "He's vanished." "And the man you fired, the one who ran this company for a decade, where is he?" Emilio continued, his eyes locking onto hers. "Trying to ruin us," she muttered. Emilio turned to the room, slowly scanning each face. "He warned you. You spat on his loyalty. You laughed in his face. And now, he's the only one who knows how to keep this place alive." Then he sat down and looked directly at Celeste. "Fix it. Call him. Beg if you have to." That evening, I was sitting on my balcony with a glass of whiskey when the call came. It wasn't Celeste this time. It was Emilio. "You still have the recovery protocols, don't you?" he asked, no apology in his voice.
"I do. We need you back." I sipped my drink, staring at the skyline I helped build. "I'm not coming back as an employee," I said. "I come back on my terms. As CEO, full control. You and Celeste step aside." Silence. Then, deal. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom in a custom navy suit, not as their errand boy, not as their family puppet, but as the man who had rebuilt their empire and was now ready to reshape it in my image. Celeste couldn't even look me in the eye. Her father gave me a single respectful nod. And me? I gave my first order. Our first initiative, ethical restructuring. And by the way, Travis's old office turned it into a janitor's closet. Seems more fitting. The board chuckled, but they all knew the king was back. I didn't come back to stay. I came back to take everything I had earned, expose every secret they had buried, and leave them with nothing but regret. Within weeks, I had cleaned up the chaos, revoked every shady deal Celeste had greenlit, and restored confidence in the board and the market. But behind the scenes, I was quietly preparing my exit. 2 months later, I called one final board meeting. This time, Celeste sat at the far end of the table, silent, small, and stripped of all authority. Emilio watched me closely, like he already suspected what was coming. "I'm stepping down," I announced, gasps around the table. "But before I go, I'm activating the final clause of my contract." I calmly handed over the documents. A buyout. Thanks to the intellectual property I co-owned, the increased value I'd created through restructuring, and the share options I had negotiated upon my return, the company now owed me $38 million in cash, not stock. It would leave their accounts bleeding, and I didn't care. This was my final invoice, payment for 10 years of backstabbing, betrayal, and humiliation. Celeste's jaw dropped. Emilio didn't speak. He just leaned back, his face pale, and stapled his fingers. They knew they couldn't stop it. They had signed the contract. They had let me back in, and I had made sure every dotted line led to this exact moment. As I left the building for the last time, Celeste came running after me. "Why?" she hissed. "Why go this far?" I smiled, because when you fired me in front of the board, I realized something. I was never just the help. I was the foundation, and without me, you collapse. She stood there speechless as I walked out the revolving doors into a waiting car, into a future that didn't include them. I used part of the payout to launch a venture fund for underdog entrepreneurs, people like me who get overlooked by the Travises of the world. The rest, I used to disappear to a quiet beach town with someone who saw me not as a tool, but as a partner. As for Celeste, the company never fully recovered from the buyout. She's now selling cheap consulting packages on LinkedIn. And Emilio? He passed away a year later, his empire a shadow of what it once was. Was this revenge? Or was it just business? You tell me.